We are live. Hey, here we are. I am joined today by Iain. It's Maclean, right? I want to say Maclean, but it's Maclean.
No, it's Maclean. I can tell you all about that too.
Okay, we can start with that until people show up. He is the author of TJ's War. If you would like to know more about Iain and his book, I highly recommend you go listen to his Zen Sammich episode 104 called Live in Constant Total Amazement. On that episode, we talk about the book, TJ's War, the story itself, and some of the lessons from the book. Today, we're going to discuss actually writing a book. And this one, the one he wrote, is no slouch. It weighs in around 450 pages. I've read it. It's riveting stuff. And that's why I wanted to talk to Iain today. So Iain, let's, and good morning, Randy House. We already got somebody here. So Iain, let's start there with, just tell the folks in a nutshell what TJ's War is about, because a lot of authors I have on written self-help books. You didn't write a self-help book. You wrote a novel.
Yeah. You've asked me the hardest question right at the beginning. An elevator pitch for TJ's War is really tough, but essentially it's a man who was born in 1921. And so in 1939, at the start of the Second World War for the British, he was at the right age to get pulled into the army, which is what happened to him. Mm-hmm. And TJ's War is about essentially a small amount about his upbringing to that point, and then how he basically survived like a pinball in a pinball machine during the war. Spent most of it in military intelligence, MI6, purely by accident, and ended up operating 3 continents and just going through some really unbelievable experiences.
Yeah, amazing.
Most of them not good. And
right.
It's also about the decline of that man, and the decline of people like him, millions of people like him, due to war.
So tell people why you wanted to write this book, because it's about your father, right?
The hero is my father, who died when I was 10 years old. And at that point, all I knew was a man who was a complete alcoholic. He needed to get out to the local pub or bar to drink alcohol at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I would help him to bed as a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old when he'd crawl back in after the last pub shut. And when I was 15, I found a photograph. I mean, when he died, I found him. I was the first one to find him dead, and I didn't realize that.
You were the first one to find your father dead?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't. Okay, well, okay, I've blanked on that. I'm sorry. I have read the book. I just
simply I'd taken a tray of breakfast up to him, and he was half in and half out of the bed. So I took the tray, removed all the stuff off it, and created a bridge between the bed and the chair, and then put a pillow in that and pulled him up onto that. And that's how my mother found him 4 hours later. But he'd been dead for maybe 2 or 3 hours by the point at which I got into the room. So anyway, I found a photograph of him when I was 15. I didn't realize it was him to start with. A young army officer, a Nazi officer in the middle, and a chap in a uniform I didn't recognize. And I went to my mother, why have we got this photograph? And she said, well, that's your father. And I didn't even know which one.
I remember that part, yeah.
So I realized that I needed to do something. And I pretty much spent a week a year for the next 30 years, nearly 40 years, going to places he'd been to and talking to people who he'd worked with.
Okay. So I don't mean to cut you off here, but let's talk about that, because assuming that people listening to this or watching this right now or later, that they're not going to put together a story over 40 years. Answer this question. As you're putting together information for your story, for TJ's story, how are you organizing it? How are you deciding what stays in, how do you start to outline or put together a book? When do you start writing the first sentence? And do you just start at the first sentence, or do you, outline the whole thing? How do you write a book, Iain?
I can tell you how I wrote that book.
Okay.
I don't think there's one size fits all. I just got a massive information in my head. I had lots of what they call arcs. I had lots and lots of story arcs
Hmm.
connected with the Second World War and connected with my father, and both before and after. Um, I hadn't intended to write a book until the pandemic came along. And then I was
Oh, okay.
operating in a foreign country. I mean, the research I did was purely for myself to find out who my father was. So during the pandemic, I was working abroad. I had time on my hands, and I thought, what can I do with this? And I really thought, pandemic, I was about 61. I'm thinking, I'm getting on a bit here. And there is this amazing man who everyone just thinks was a drunk.
Hmm.
I really need to get this down before I disappear off into the eternal. And now is the perfect time. And in fact, with the pandemic, you didn't know you were going to get to the other end of it or not. So maybe the
Yeah.
eternal was sooner than I thought.
Right.
So that was my impetus to start thinking about a book. And I then just started by a point. I actually picked a point at which he was under fire in Norway,
Hmm.
fairly early part of the war for him.
Yeah.
But I just started writing that piece.
Well, okay. So I have read it. That the book starts that way. How did you decide that's the starting point for the? I mean, was that just happened to be chronologically the first piece of information you had about him?
No. I had to start somewhere, and I just chose that point.
Okay.
But to me, there wasn't a lot of planning around that. That I just felt comfortable writing about that episode, and
Okay.
the rest of the story sort of came out of that. As I described the characters, um, I've met a lot of these people. I've talked to them. They're all dead now,
Mm.
but I knew I had a good feel for each one of the people that I was describing and the others who I'd not met.
Hmm.
So I was really writing a novel as opposed to a list of facts. And
Yeah. What?
as I was describing the characters, the stories flowed out of that.
Okay. Yeah. I
So the
want people to.
arcs, yeah, the arcs sort of fitted in, and I wrote a lot more than what you've actually read.
I bet. I'm sure you did. Uh,
But then you think, well, no, I'm going down a dead end here, or it's not really pertinent to the overall arc of the story. So I was
yeah. That
fiddling as I went along.
that is really my next question is like, how do you know? I mean, I guess it's a little different because you do have his story. That's what I want people to realize is that it reads like a novel, but it is it's creative nonfiction, right? So you do have his story that goes along, but you are also being creative about it. So did you hit any kind of writer's block episodes or any like, creative stumbling points?
I didn't hit writer's block, but I that's almost a different subject, because the reason I didn't hit writer's block was I was writing the book for somebody, and that's not my father. I had a person I would send the chapters to as I completed each one, and I get
Okay.
feedback from this wonderful woman who was reading these chapters, um, and the feedback would have more to do with the following chapters. As I wrote, I'd be thinking, what's you going to think of this?
Hmm.
And so there was, we were talking earlier about timelines and so on. She wasn't the timeline, but she was a kind of a customer. And so I felt a need to provide the product for the customer as I was going along.
I
And
see.
I think that's really important. I think that having somebody that you're writing for as you're writing, who is not you, uh, helps to keep you going. I certainly didn't. I never had writer's block throughout the entire writing of the book. I wrote the book. I probably wrote about 600 pages in total, and I wrote all of that in about 8 months. I didn't find it difficult at all.
Wow. Was she giving you feedback all along? Like you
All
needed?
along, yeah. And you know, um, a lot of it was positive, which is great, but there There was some really challenging feedback in there.
Yeah.
Really, really, you're going there, or really, they would say that, and
How did you take that? How did you take the sort of critical
well, I'm kind of used
criticism?
to it. I've got I've 4 children of my own. I've got 4 stepchildren. I've got 3 grandchildren. I'm kind of used to getting a lot of criticism. So,
Okay.
but even so, when you've produced something, even if it's just a few pages, and somebody comes along and says they wouldn't do that, or that doesn't work, you are having to. You just have to take it on the chin and take a step back
Yeah.
from it.
I think you have to for sure. So what was how many pages would you churn out a day? Were you writing every day, 7 days a week, or
I was
what
working
was your?
weekends. I was working when I was abroad, so I only had 2 days a week. But with the pandemic, it meant that those 2 days you were literally locked into your house. So I would work 2 days a week, and I would produce roughly 3 or 4 pages a day.
Okay. Wow, and you got to 800 or 600 pages in 8 months. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's about that.
Yeah. Wow. So you didn't take any weekends off then?
Yeah, I didn't want to. I was really into it.
I think that's key. I think that it's got to be a passion project. I
Yeah.
don't know. You can't just like, I think I'm going to write a book. You got to really want to write a book. Well, so this one, it's self-published, right? You
Yes.
did it through Amazon. Do you recommend that? How was the publishing process?
Well, I didn't really have any option. People said you need to get an agent. That's the only way to get into a publisher. And that's probably true. So I approached, I don't know, 15, 20 different agents. There's a book you can buy, which is updated every year, that tells you who all the publishers and agents are around the world.
Yeah.
And you can look through that. But this was, by the time I finished, the pandemic was over. Everybody in the world who could write a book had written a book during the pandemic. So I would send off emails or letters to agents, and they'd invariably come back with, we're not accepting any new material right now, and we won't be for a while, because they were just inundated.
Well, yeah. I read Stephen King's book on writing. He wrote a book about writing, and he talked about I can't, I've read it years and years ago, but I can't remember. So I can't remember how many rejection slips he had, but he had a nail that he put in the wall and these were just like, these were like article submissions to magazines and stuff. These were kind of small potatoes for what he actually winds up doing, in life. But he would just get rejection slip after rejection slip, and he filled up the nail. Like, I mean, he couldn't put any more on the nail because he just kept getting rejected, but he never stopped. And, he finally made it.
I get that. And I don't really know what I would have done if there wasn't something like Amazon, or there's Ingram Spark as well. It's another one where the self-publishing path is fairly straightforward and the costs are low. But I'm listening to Moby Dick at the moment. Have you read Moby Dick or heard it?
No, I shamefully no. I mean, I know the story, but I haven't read it myself.
Herman Melville wrote that book in 1850. The 100th copy was sold in 1919, which was the 100th year anniversary of his birth. The only problem with that was that he died in 1891.
So he never even saw how successful that book was. Yeah.
It's now a piece of American literature, famous American literature.
Right.
I'm not putting my book in the same league.
Well,
but,
you never know.
Yeah. there's lots of good people that have been rejected, so you're in a good club when you've been rejected.
So then you never got discouraged. You just kept pushing forward as you're writing it.
Yeah, I mean, my background as I've been, my discipline is computer science, and after that I then became a project manager and program director, in some really, really interesting, complex, difficult projects where a lot of people thought that they couldn't be done. And in each case, more and more I came to the conclusion that there's always an answer. Didn't matter what the problem was, there was always a way. You just had to find it. And so,
you need to be a life coach on LinkedIn, man.
but the real issue is getting the right people around you.
Yeah, I know
You
you're a
need,
believer of that, right? That
yeah,
surround yourself with the right people.
surround yourself with the right people. As long as
Yeah.
you've done that, then you'll find a way.
Mm.
And with the book, I mean, I'd love to be, you know, I want it out there for world peace. I think if people read this book, they'll realize the nonsense that World War II was and other wars since are, including the one in Ukraine and Russia. This is,
Mm.
it's horrific nonsense. And there are other ways to do things. And we really need to look at this.
Yeah.
But, you know, at the moment, I'm in Field of Dreams. Build it and they will come, you know.
Yeah.
It's the book is there. I've got a wonderful chap called Quinn who's doing my media and social media stuff and all the rest of it. And he's working hard and I'm working hard. And we've got David Blair who did the audio version of the book and he's working hard too. And we're trying to get this off the ground in as many different ways as we can, but it's still bumping along the bottom at the moment.
Yeah. One more question about the writing before we go to like the promotion of the book. When you're writing dialogue, like again, that's stuff you had to create, right? Because you've got information on where your father was and what he was doing, but you don't know what the actual words that are being said between two
Yeah.
people. So when you're writing dialogue, how do you write compelling, engaging dialogue? What's your recommendation for just imagine what they're saying? Or, I mean, do you have a method to creating compelling dialogue?
You create the characters.
Okay.
You spend time both in the writing and in the thinking defining those characters. And then in your head, you will realize, yes, they would say this. No, they wouldn't say that. And
Mm.
sometimes going back to my person that I was writing for, she would say, they wouldn't say that. And I realized that I haven't defined this character well enough for her.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think
So I would
what
go back and do
someone,
that.
yeah, in the comments had mentioned that the one thing they really like that you've said so far is to have like an ideal reader in mind, or have you know write it for someone and get
Yeah.
feedback from that person. Do you think then that because your father passed when you were 10, do you think through writing this book you have? I mean, I'm sure you do feel like you've uncovered. Well, I know you've uncovered more about him, but do you feel like you've actually sort of tapped into his personality? That like you're having to write his words. Do you think you got it right?
I can only hope. Uh,
Well, I
if
mean, do you know what I mean? Like, did you feel like you learned enough about him that, like, you know what? Yeah, I only knew him up until I was 10, but I think this is what he really would say.
well, there were only very few times that I remember him sober.
Yeah.
So he had a great smile when he was sober, and he had a very sharp mind when he was sober. Um, but really, I have defined his character through the memories of a lot of other people, as well as my small amount of memory of him.
Yeah.
But so I have this image of my father, because the memory of my father is not great.
Right. I mean,
So, but I have an image of my father based on my many years of talking to people, which is quite different, obviously.
hmm.
And,
Yeah.
and, and, and that image, that character, I can fairly easily write what he would have said.
Yeah, I get that. I get that as well. I mean, my grandfather passed when I was younger than 10, but I think that given the information I have about him and just my memories of being with him, I think I could write a character that I think would be close, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Uh, so Randy asked a question, and it sounds like one I asked before, but I think it's different. And I think it this way. So before I asked if you ever had creative writer's block, you said not really, And Randy asked, did you ever get stuck in a fog while writing? I interpret that to like, instead of creative writer's block, you're writing so much so fast, you kind of get monkey mind, like where you like, oh, I want to go over here, but I want to go over here in this direction. Did you get so lost in the different directions you might take the story that you get lost in a fog, so to speak?
Yeah, no, and I get that. Yes, is the answer to that question. I a number of times, not that many, but a number of times, maybe I don't know, 5 or 6 times, I would end up in a dead end, and I'd have to backtrack to an earlier node where taking me down, turning right took me down to a dead end, and really I needed to at that node point go left instead and bypass it or whatever. So there's a number of times where TJ the story can appear to jump. You know, the first 6 months in Bermuda, I say almost nothing about that. Well, I don't know. I haven't got it here anymore, but there are pages and pages about that.
Right.
It just didn't get me anywhere, so it wasn't useful to the story.
So you couldn't use it. Yeah, I get it. Well, let's talk about promoting the book. How did you have a did you have a plan? Did you have a marketing plan for the book, or how do you promote a book once you've written one and you've published it?
Well, so there's a bit in between, which is actually publishing the book. So I, through research, find that Amazon have this facility because I'd never done this before. So I found that KDF is a tool or a service that Amazon provide for people who want to publish their own books. It's quite a learning process. There's a fair amount to learn to get through it. There's the cover. So I need to go and find somebody to go and produce the cover for the book.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that as well.
Yeah, my wife hates it. I got the cover designed. If you're doing hardback, the cover's got to be one size. If it's paperback, it's got to be a different size. Depending on the number of pages you got in the book, it can change the size quite quickly because the spine gets thicker or thinner.
Yeah.
So all of that was, I was learning a lot about that, and I was learning a lot about the price of the book in different countries. And then at the end of the day, I mean, I edit the book. I probably edited it 10 times over the last year. And so I look back at it now, and actually the process is quite simple with Amazon. But it took a while to get on top of it. And there are tools to help you, but they're not that useful. Maybe I'll do a video about how to publish a book on Amazon.
Absolutely.
But once it's out there, your customers, your readers can get onto the Amazon website and buy it directly from them, and Amazon will look after the distribution for you, the shipping of those books out. That's all wonderful. You're not paying for that. That's
but they take a pretty good cut, don't they?
No, Amazon? They do. Yeah. I'm not gonna get rich doing this. Okay. Even if I sell 1 million.
Yeah.
But the other thing you can do is you can get author copies, and the copies that you can get for yourself, they come at more or less the cost of printing.
Yeah.
So if you've got the money to buy them, you can get hundreds of books produced that way. At
cost, right? And then go sell them. Yeah, go do a book signing somewhere. Yeah.
And then distribute them yourself. But obviously that's a whole different.
I know. I wrote I was a contributor on a book. I don't call myself an author, but I contributed to a book that just came out, and it was on the Amazon bestseller list. But you sort of play the game to get there. Like you have everybody buy it the first 24 hours, and it'll pop on the list, and then you can say it's a bestseller. I mean, I'm not anybody that was a part of that project. I'm not disparaging what people did, but I forgot my point in even bringing that up. Oh, well.
Don't worry. We were going to talk about marketing, and I interrupted you, but the marketing of the book, again, it's not something I've ever done before. Much harder than you're led to believe, especially because of this. Fact that the self-publishing, the bookshops are not interested in you if you've self-published a book.
Yeah, I've heard that. And then, what I was going to say, or the reason I brought that other stuff up was that, so I had access to author, because I was a contributing author, I could buy the author copies. But what am I going to do with them here in Japan? Nobody's free. I can't sell them here in Japan. So
Start an English school.
I am doing that, but I don't think they're ready to read my story yet. Dan Eveland, I believe is his last name, asked, did you use visuals of pictures? So, I mean, he might have missed the first part of the story we're talking about. The character is actually based on your father, but still, did you use pictures of, well, let's say Norway or whatever, when you're writing that segment of the story? Did you use visuals to kind of put you there mentally?
Because it's creative nonfiction, there are pictures out there for most of the people I was actually describing. Mm-hmm. So yes, absolutely. I would go and do a fair amount of research. Obviously, I spent quite a few years researching, and I'd actually talked to quite a lot of the people who were in there. And so the visuals were already in my head. The locations, yes, I've been to most of the locations that I describe, and I've also, used Google Earth and any other tools I could to check distances and so on.
By the way, Victoria McMahon.
Oh yes,
I don't know if you know her, but yes, she loved the book, but agrees with your wife. She wasn't crazy about the cover.
Thanks. That woman is eternally honest. She's reading this Peterson thing at the moment, which says you have to be honest about everything. It's killing me.
Well, yeah, but you do need a few people like that in your life. You do need people like that in your life. This gentleman, I don't know, HRM wants to know how much of a cut I think does Amazon take? Like 40% or something, right?
Amazon, they end up taking around about 70 to 75%.
Wow, that much?
Yeah, but I mean that covers all their costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, including the well, yes, if somebody's buying it on Prime, then they're not paying for delivery either. So whatever.
Yeah. Well, we got like 3 minutes left. I was going to ask like some questions that Americans might have for British people. So anybody like, do you really drink tea all the time?
Yes. Milk, no sugar.
Yeah. Why do you insist on calling cookies biscuits? Why do you throw those unnecessary U's in words like color and flavor?
Well, biscuits is from the French for a biscuit is essentially a cake that's cooked again. So it's cooked twice.
And, so you actually have a logical reason for this.
Yeah. Okay. Biscuit means by cuit. Cuit is French for cooking, and by is French or version of French for twice. Right. So the thing is cooked twice. That's why we use the word biscuit. Of course, Americans can't understand French. They just go for cookie.
We don't understand English, Ian. Are you kidding?
Churchill said that America and Britain were separated by a common language.
Yeah, that's true. He was half American, or like one of his parents was American.
His mother.
Right? Yes. Well, what else you got going on? How can people find you? Obviously on LinkedIn. Are you anywhere else?
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. LinkedIn, but also through the website TJ's War, TJSWAR.com.
Okay.
If you get on there, then you can find everything else. Email addresses, and there's a number of pictures on there that I used during my came across during my research, including the one that kicked this all off in the first place. And anybody who wants to email me about anything, I'm more than happy to discuss a wide range of things. TJ's War, of course, right. But if you want to argue about how the stones were cut and transported to build the pyramids, I'm very happy to discuss that as well.
We were talking about that before we went live, and he's an expert on that as well. I'll have to have you back on, and we'll talk about Stonehenge and the pyramids of Egypt.
Please don't call me an expert. It's one of my laws in life. I've got 3: never use bank money, never trust an Aberdonian, and no surprises. Nobody should ever come to me with a surprise.
Well, you are, whether it's an expert or not, you are a wealth of information and a pleasure to talk to. So I appreciate your time today, Ian.
Mark, it's always a pleasure talking to you. I very much enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Awesome.